Half of you watching right now are about to lose your minds in the comments, but somebody has to say it. You worship the Hemi name like Chrysler handed it down from Mount Olympus on a gold platter. Take a breath and look at the actual facts. Chrysler didn't invent the hemispherical combustion chamber, not even close. Plenty of manufacturers built them before Chrysler ever slapped a trademark on the word. And don't get me started on what they did to that legendary badge in the 70s and 80s. They literally slapped Hemi on an Australian inline 6 and a damn 4-cylinder Mitsubishi engine in North America. Yeah, you heard me right. Your holy grail muscle badge was sitting under the hood of an economy 4-banger. But when Chrysler actually committed to building a true V8 Hemi, it wasn't some refined piece of Swiss watchmaking. It was a massive, expensive, insanely heavy iron monster designed for pure, unadulterated power. Tell me I'm wrong, you can't. Let's talk specs and design mechanics, because this is where muscle car fanboys start coping. The whole point of a hemispherical head is raw power output. You get an unbelievable surface-to-volume ratio, minimal heat loss to the cylinder head, and enough physical space to cram 2 massive valves inside. But here is the catch. Because those valves are huge, you're capped out at 2 valves per cylinder. Because they sit on opposite sides of the chamber, you have to run a cross-flow head design with intake and exhaust valve stems pointing in totally different directions. You know what that means? Complex rocker arm geometry. Chrysler literally advertised these early engines as having a double rocker shaft head just to explain the hardware nightmare under the valve covers. And if you think a flat-top piston works in a Hemi chamber, think again. Without a massive domed piston protruding right into the head at top dead center, your compression ratio drops straight into the gutter. Now here is the dirty secret enthusiasts pretend not to notice: the packaging and octane problems. Because the head has to be a partial hemisphere, if the diameter equals the piston size, you get almost zero squish area. That means terrible fuel-air turbulence inside the combustion chamber. The result? These engines are absolute octane divas. For any given compression ratio, a Hemi requires significantly higher octane fuel to prevent violent detonation compared to simple wedge or bathtub head design. If you feed it cheap gas, it will ping itself to death. Then there is the physical size. Those wide cylinder heads and dual rocker shafts turn the engine into an absolute unit. It is ridiculously wide, absurdly heavy, and wildly expensive to manufacture. It literally limited what engine bays Chrysler could shoehorn the damn thing into. Oh, and if you're looking at a first-gen block, just look for the rear-mounted distributor and spark plugs lined up straight down the center of those wide valve covers. Where did Chrysler get the crazy idea to build a dual-rocker cross-flow monstrosity in the first place? It wasn't on a drag strip. It was military warfare. During World War II, Chrysler developed an experimental aircraft engine called the XIV-2220. We are talking about an inverted overhead valve V16 Hemi churning out a staggering 2,500 horsepower. They tested it in a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt in 1945. War ended before it hit production, but Chrysler learned everything about 2-valve Hemi dynamics, and they didn't stop at planes. Chrysler teamed up with Continental Motors to develop the massive air-cooled AV-1795B V12 Hemi engine for the M47 Pat tank. That is the real DNA of this design: warplanes and heavy armored tanks. When Chrysler brought this tech to passenger cars for the 1951 model year, they didn't even call it a Hemi. It debuted in 1950 as the Firepower V8. That original 1951 Firepower V8 packed 331 cubic inches and pumped out 180 brake horsepower. On paper, that was badass for 1951, but Chrysler's corporate execution was a complete mess. Instead of sharing one engineered engine across the entire lineup, 3 different Chrysler divisions went out and built their own distinct versions. Chrysler and Imperial ran the 331 Firepower. Dodge built a smaller version called the Red Ram. Plymouth, they didn't even get a Hemi. They were stuck using Dodge polyhead engines and flatheads until 1964. And here's the ridiculous part: these division engines had different bore spacings. They shared almost 0 interchangeable parts. It was an assembly line nightmare, but race car builders saw the potential. Briggs Cunningham stuffed the Chrysler Firepower into his race cars, and his Cunningham C5R actually won its class at International Motorsports in 1953. Chrysler was so wild in the early 50s, they even prototyped an experimental 1951 Plymouth engine known internally as the A173. It was a dual overhead cam Hemi V6 displacing 235 cubic inches, designed as a killer replacement for the old flathead 6 to fight Ford's V8. But Chrysler's executives killed it because the build costs were astronomical, and the design was too weird for the time. Meanwhile, on the track, Carl Kiefer dominated NASCAR using Chrysler Hemi engines in 1955 and 1956, taking back-to-back Grand National Series championships. But even with all those trophies, Chrysler couldn't ignore the production costs and weight. So in 1959, Cunningham had to switch away because Chrysler temporarily killed off the hemispherical design entirely. They dumped the Hemi in favor of the cheaper, lighter wedgehead B engine. For 5 whole years, the auto world had no Chrysler Hemi. Then came 1964, and Chrysler resurrected the beast with the iconic 426 cubic inch, that's 7 liters race and street engine. That second generation 426 ran from 1964 all the way through 1971, cementing the Hemi name in tire smoke and legend. But as we saw, Chrysler couldn't help themselves in the 70s and 80s, watering down the sacred name by slapping Hemi badges on Australian Hemi 6 engines and import 4 cylinders. It wasn't until 2003 that Chrysler launched the third generation, giving us the modern family of advanced Hemis ranging from 5.7 to 6.4 liters, or 348 to 391 cubic inches. But let's be honest with each other. No matter how good a modern 5.7 or 6.4 is, nothing captures that pure, unhinged mechanical overkill quite like the classic Iron Giant built between 64 and 71. Look, love it or hate it, Chrysler's Hemi legacy is one hell of a ride. It started on military fighter planes and heavy pat tanks, survived corporate bean counters, splitting bore spacings across divisions, got cancelled in 1959 for a wedge head, and came back to dominate the street. Was it heavy as hell? Yes. Was it expensive to build, wider than a house, and sensitive to octane? Absolutely. But when you stepped on the gas, none of that mattered. So go ahead, tell me I'm wrong down in the comments. Is the legendary 426 the greatest engine design of the muscle car era, or was it just a heavy, overcomplicated money pit that got saved by legendary marketing? Hit that subscribe button, drop your hottest take below, and I'll see you at the next meet.